That was really on the dot.
Yeah.
It's like,
Okay, we all ready?
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
hello. Hi, everyone. My name's Starlight. Welcome to Music as a Story Element, or how music adds to audio drama storytelling. So I'll be your host today. And really quick, before we introduce our panelists, there's a couple things I want to go over. Don't forget about our giveaway we have going on. We also have bingo cards you can fill out. And all links for all of those should be on our Twitch page. And also, please keep the chat PG-13 just to be on the safe side. Okay, so to start with introductions, I'm going to go in order. So we have Athan, also Jonathan Magno. Did I pronounce that right?
Yep. My name is Athan. I am the creator of The Grotto, and then here soon, Redacted on the Rusty Quill Network with Jamie Petronas from Cellar Letters. And I just make music and stuff. That's my thing. Also, happy birthday, Cherry.
Okay, so next we have Eira.
Hi, I'm Eira. I make a bunch of shows. I'm currently releasing Remnants and Not Quite Dead. And I've been making music for a little bit longer than I've been making audio drama. I used to perform live as Maybe Wednesday, where I was the whole band, and that was kind of the joke. And I still release all of my audio drama music under that name.
Very nice. And we're all very excited about the next season of Not Quite Dead, too.
Oh, thank you.
And so next we have G.
Yes. I'm G or GOOBOOGY. I make the music and voice one of the characters in the Icarus Rock. And I've been making music for a while, kind of like a lifelong endeavor. And right now I'm actually in school for it and the president of my school's music tech club. Um, and yeah, hell yeah, moo.
And next we have Marisa.
Yeah, my name's Marissa. I'm the creator of the horror audio drama Liars and Leeches. I also own the production company Hellmont Creek Productions, so I do audio editing for podcasts as well as video games and film. Um, I think music-wise, you might have heard me in Transplanar RPG most recently, but I'm around a fair amount on other things. I tend to do a lot of mixing and mastering of the music, though, in recent times.
Very cool. Okay. So I'm going to start with our questions. I'm just going to start with an easy one. What comes first, writing or music? We'll start with Athan up top.
I think it kind of depends. Is kind of a cop out answer, but like for anybody that's familiar, like my show, every episode has a song and a cover in it. And so like I think if you're doing a project that's a little bit more built around music, I think you kind of have to do both at the same time. But I think for like an audio drama in general, I think you really have to get your core, at least your core bullet point writing down, like what your flow is going to be. That way you know what emotional beats you're going to be hitting for sure.
Okay. Anyone else want to go?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really depends on the project. But something like Remnants, I had an outline and a very vague episode plan before I started working on any of the music, and I did have a sort of idea of what I wanted the music for the show to sound like and how I wanted it to work fairly early on in the process because I knew that it was going to be quite integral to how the story was going to work. But then for something like Not Quite Dead, there's very little music in that at all, and the theme song, so the intro and the outro for that, that I didn't make that until I'd completely recorded the first episode. So
I
I
think
know you
that
had
I've
some for Spirit Box Radio too, right?
sorry.
I know you had some stuff for Spirit Box Radio as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. The music for Spirit Box Radio was like a really different experience to both Remnants and Not Quite Dead, because I had written some parts of the music that went into Spirit Box Radio before I'd made the show. So that was all completely different again. Yeah.
Very cool. Marissa?
So I think for me, typically my process when it's come to creating has been to at least get a bullet point plot, kind of like people were mentioning before. But in all of my example or all of my creative processes, I tend to, when writing, have a playlist of songs that are similar to what I'd like my music to sound like or hit a similar emotional beat as the music for the shows. I found that it's really helpful writing, kind of having the music aesthetic behind me as I'm writing. So even though it's not my original music, there's, for Liars and Leeches, we listened a lot to the soundtracks for Devs and Annihilation. So like listening to those while writing helped a lot. But yeah, I would always write the plot first before creating any original music, especially because, when you're writing plots, things change so much that if you tried to write music when you had the first draft of your plot, you'd probably end up wasting your time having to change things.
Yeah, at least your bullet, like your core idea. You can't just make a bunch of music and say, "Cool, let me make a show now," or let me write an episode now. I think you have to know where you're going to be going at least.
Mhm.
That makes sense. G, did you want to
Yeah,
go?
yeah, I'd say for the Icarus Rot, the process is a little bit different because I'm not in any sort of writing role. So for that one, for that project, it's more as we go over the scripts, as we read through it, I'm thinking about like, okay, what kind of music goes here? What kind of music could work well with this scene or like at this phrase, um, when do we want to what kind of noises could be put here, sort of deal. Um, so for that one, the writing's first. Um, and yeah, like everyone said, it depends on the project.
That makes sense. Okay, so next question. When do you know a moment needs music?
Are we doing the same
Eira,
orders or?
you look like you're ready to go.
I have specific rules about where music goes in my shows. So I have never written something that it's like I know for a lot of people where you put the music, it's going to come in and like so when we're watching a TV show or something, and then the music will come in at a moment. That's never really the case with the stuff that I'm making. Spirit Box Radio has a little bit of that, but even then, there were specific rules as to when the music would start. It would be like, oh, it's specifically connected to these moments. So it's like if X and Y, then there will be music happening here. And in Remnants, it's very specifically there is only music when a remnant is being read. So the format of Remnants is there's a framing narrative with a character called the Apprentice, and his weird friend ish Sir. They read they read objects which are remnants, and in the world outside of the remnants, there's no music, but within the remnants itself themselves, there's music. So there's always very specific and rigid guidelines for me as I'm going through because I don't know yeah, instinctively that's what I want to do is I want to give myself these rigid structures for how I'm going to implement it rather than having that more freeform thing.
Yeah, I think to your point, it really again, I think it depends a little bit because like if this is going to be a shock to anybody that's familiar with my show, but I think that music, like almost less of it, can make it hit more when it hits. Now, obviously, there's pretty much constantly music in Grotto, but only because the music is kind of its own character, which is its own like narrative framing. But yeah, 100%. I think you just have it play. It's almost like a gut read, but if you have, like you said, checkpoints and rules, it helps you stay within your guidelines that you set for yourself.
I
That makes
tend
sense.
to uh I tend to try and add music in a way that really underscores emotional beats like people were saying, but I think at least my personal style for music is that less is more. Like if you listen to any shows that I work on, if I'm the one choosing the music, it's always very like ambient and atmospheric. It's never really something that you can like hum along to. because I think, at least me working mostly in horror, I feel like sometimes when you have like really heavily melodic pieces, sometimes it can like distract you from what's going on in the story. And I know that's just like my personal opinion, but um I've also found, I think kind of like what you were saying about having a gut check really makes sense, because I think there are some emotional moments that do better without music. Like, for example, in one of my shows, there's a scene where a character is being kind of like hunted. And I found that instead of having like a drone or ambient music in the background, it was significantly more effective to be able to hear every little like creak of the floorboards or like claws on the stairs or things like that. So I think having rules definitely makes sense, but sometimes there will be a time where like that specific story you kind of have to overwrite your own rules, because even
Yeah.
though that was a very emotional scene, I think that having music there would have kind of taken away from it.
Oh yeah, totally. And the power of having music like generally happening in that sort of ambient way and then pulling it all out and suddenly focusing you in on a really impactful moment. Sucking the music out of a scene is sometimes as impactful emotionally as
Yep.
adding it back in. And I think that's
Yeah.
absolutely something to bear in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say inversely, there, we're in for audio drama specifically, anybody here that's working on a show or making a show, you're in a unique place where you're basically eliminating all but one sense for the person enjoying the content, right? And so there's some scenes that generally would be translated visually. I think that inversely, you can use music to almost define a scene. Like I'll have like sometimes rather than trying to script out and make sounds for like a fight scene and have like the hits and oomphs, if you just have the score pick up to kind of become the scene itself, you can do a more interpretive version of the scene you're trying to do, as opposed to literally, hand them the sound and what's happening.
I think that also
So you
keeps
don't.
you from having like formulaic shows, like you're saying. Like
Yeah.
if you always follow the same pattern every time, it doesn't have that same impact as kind of keeping listeners on their toes.
Mhm.
To answer the
I would
question, how do you
also,
know? You
sorry,
don't. No, go
no
ahead.
real. I was also gonna say, in a more technical aspect, I think also sometimes like scene transitions, sometimes can be a good spot for music to come in and just kind of sort of like a show don't tell of setting up the scene. Um, and yeah, I mean, yeah, basically what everyone else said. Less is more is also like a big key thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the combative one. I'm gonna say sometimes more is more. I think there's some scenes you just have to just like, and I'm not even joking. I think some scenes you have to just say, you know what? I've done all these quiet things. This scene, you know what we're gonna do? We're just gonna go absolutely just blast in. Because again, to your point, Marissa, it's about following a formula. If you have a formula you're following, the rules that you set allow you to break them in ways that can also
Mhm.
surprise the audience. So you just have to just, yeah, there's no good answer. Just kind of float
Okay. How do you know when you've mismatched the music to the moment?
when it sucks.
Yeah,
That's
you
a
just
general
kind of get an
consensus.
instinct for it.
That's
Yeah, like just I just immediately know. Like sometimes, because the way that the music for Remnants in particular works is there are there's a bunch of different like pieces that I have written that appear in different variations and configurations throughout the show and are changed as we move through it. And sometimes I think, oh, like this bit of composition will go over this scene, and then I add them together, and just immediately it's like, no, that is not working here, and that's not jamming in this moment at all. And it's a really instinctual feeling, almost like wall on your teeth. It's
yeah.
like no, thank you.
I'll say one thing you can do to help with that too, for anybody here that's like trying to get into or does this is, you know, I say a lot of the time, and people that have heard me talk on my stream and other things are probably familiar, but like just because you spend a lot of time on something doesn't mean it's necessarily consumer or listener ready, right? And so a good
Mm-hmm.
skill to develop in anything you do is just being able to objectively look at something you've created. And if you spend a lot of time on a scene, which we all have, you spend a lot of time on a scene, you build this music and you put it together, and then you objectively listen and you're like, this just isn't good. Just being able to recognize that and tear it back down and build it again is, I think, a life-changing skill. You can take that to anywhere you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not holding on too tightly to um what is it? Kill your darlings.
Oh yeah,
Sometimes gotta kill them.
yeah.
Okay. Most creative things never feel done. How do you know when to walk away and leave well enough alone?
Depends on how bad my body hurts.
Okay.
In my experience, it's release day. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Just skipping it.
Fair.
Does anybody else? No? Just me? Okay.
I feel like usually I think there's a point where I keep making changes, trying to nitpick, and I start to notice that the improvement, if there are any improvements, they're very minute. And sometimes it even feels like I'm going backwards by like nitpicking too much. So that's my personal point where it's like, I just spent an hour trying to mess around with this particular sound effect, and listening back through it sounds, maybe marginally better, if that, than it did before. So I think that's the point where I start to kind of let it go, because I think I'm the type of person that if I was allowed to nitpick forever, I would
Yeah.
nitpick forever.
Yeah. I think you also have to be able to just like sometimes trust other people. Like if you have people on your team that you're working with, if I've been working on something for like 12 hours, I'm just like, you know what, this is dumb, and I send it to somebody else just to put other ears on it.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to have people that you trust in your circle, I think, is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have re-edited Spirit Box Radio 3 times since it came out. I 2 of those were during release when I got better at what I was doing, and then went back and changed it. And changing the way that the music was working with the show was a big part of that. Um, because my background had been as a writer and as a musician. So I'd been writing in prose, and so moving into audio, I was falling a lot back on my skills as a musician. But it was the first time that I was approaching anything in this kind of a way, and the music ended up it just the way that I was using it in Spirit Box Radio. I felt like I wanted to change it and come back to it. So, um, I have to. I have now a theme you will see emerging is I have very strict guidelines for myself that I follow now about like how much I will allow myself to change something and when I have to say it's done, because it's very easy for me to as Marissa said, to just you can just pick at it and pick at it again and again ad infinitum, which I really did with the Spirit Box Radio, which is why it's been edited through 3 times at this point. And yeah, you just have to get to a point where it's like, am I communicating what I need to communicate? And is that clear? Is that going to be clear when I listen through? And yeah, having people who you can play things back to and who you can get honest feedback from is really, really helpful in like providing checks and balances, because sometimes it's really hard to know.
Oh, I don't want to take over, but I want to add on to really quickly when so sending it to people that you trust and know that can listen to it. I think inversely, and I don't want to be too much of a Debbie Downer, but I think if you have people that are just going to tell you, "Oh, it's great," and they're not going to actually give feedback, I think that can hurt
Yes.
you significantly more than
Mm-hmm.
anything else.
I
Yeah, like
completely agree.
it like depends on what you need in that moment. Like sometimes you need a cheerleader, but like if you're at a point where you're like, I don't know if I'm done yet, you need somebody who's going to be able to be honest with you and give you like real feedback. Whether that's a lay person who's just gonna like who doesn't really know anything about audio production or music, where they can go, this just isn't working. I can't put my finger on why. And then because that's like most listeners are going to come from it from that perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a really valuable point of view, is to have somebody who doesn't know how any of these things work go, this feels wrong to me. And then you can go, okay, so something isn't working. And then at the same time, sometimes it's really great to have friends who are also in the industry listen back to stuff and be like, there is something misaligned here in this moment, and this is where I think it's happening. So those are both like really valuable perspectives.
Mhm.
What is the part of the process do you think you've really got down? And do you have any lessons that you can share from that?
You get better at anything if you do it 20,000 times. I think is kind of, you know,
Like getting your
that would be the
10,000 hours in.
yeah. I don't think I'm really I don't think I'm good at any part of the process, but I know I am. I think that I just know where all the buttons are on FL Studio, and so I can just that's my skill.
I think one for me that I've gotten very good at over time has been giving constructive feedback. Because I think with composition, especially, a lot of feedback tends to be in like vibes, I guess. Like, I don't feel like this is flowy enough, or this part is too stagnant, or things like that. And I feel like, as someone coming from more of a sound design background, that it really takes a lot of skill to be able to like describe how you want your music to fit into a piece, what emotions you want it to evoke, and things like that in a constructive way, instead of just kind of giving out vibes. So I feel like that's something that I improved over time, but definitely when starting to work with composers, and for some of the shows that I work on, there are external composers because you can't do everything by yourself. And I feel like giving feedback on music is probably one of like the hardest things you have to learn when you're working in audio drama, at least for me. I don't know.
Strong.
Dialogue feedback feels so much easier, just being like, this breath is too loud, turn it down.
Oh, and inversely being able to filter feedback too, because I know plenty of people, or you'll see people comment too, that are like, "Oh, this is good," or "This is bad," and just being able to say, this I'm taking, this I'm ignoring," and just being able to trust your vision too. I think inversely is huge too.
Mhm.
I feel like one of the things that happens when you work in a creative industry for a long time is you realize that you go into it thinking it's like, oh, it's probably like 90% writing music and like 10%, feedback, or, stuff like that. And then you find out that it's actually like 30-40% writing music, and the rest is like planning, feedback, editing, things like that. Um, and I feel like
I'd
those
argue
skills
that
are harder to learn.
starting a show and doing everything involved with a show, including music and recording and editing and packaging it all up together and releasing it, is only like 40% of the work to running a show,
1000%.
right? Like, so there's so much more, and you have to think, if you break it all down and boil it down, everything is just small little pieces.
It's all spreadsheets.
Yeah, it's always been spreadsheets.
I feel like everyone in the audio drama community loves spreadsheets.
I think it's a love-hate relationship with the spreadsheets, if I'm being honest.
I mean, we still
You
real. I
need
work in
them. You need
project
the
management
spreadsheets.
professionally, so I work like I do a lot of like spreadsheet and like CRM stuff, so I love it. That if anything, that's my answer to what talent and skill have you learned is how to navigate a spreadsheet. That's my advice for music production is spreadsheet formulas.
Um, How do you go about finding a balance between music and the sound effects so they don't overwhelm each other? Marissa, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think for me, um, I think it really depends on the moment. I think this is probably one of the most difficult parts in post-production, is finding that balance. For me personally, I feel this is my philosophy, and I know other people probably feel differently, but I feel like music is kind of a spice and the sound effects are like the main course. So I will add music in my shows, but try to not have it overwhelm or be constant. I think that listening to music constantly through a show can sometimes get a bit tiring. And I also think that a lot of storytelling can come through the sound effects and like little moments. Like I love focusing on like breaths, sighs, little tiny sound effects that can get swallowed really easily. So I feel like my answer is two parts of that. Music is definitely more of a spice, and then I also think a lot of it really comes into play in the mixing and mastering phases, because I think you could have a show that's mixed really well where there's lots of music in it and the sound effects don't get overwhelmed, or you could have it mixed poorly and it's like, okay, I couldn't hear any footsteps, or this time the sound effects were overwhelming the music, things like that. So it's definitely a fine line to walk, but ultimately I do think it comes down to a lot of mixing and mastering.
Yeah, I think so. It's like absolutely you have to make sure that you're and like you're giving precedent to anything that's like part of the story, the key storytelling. And in moments for me, that is the music, and in moments for me, that is the sound effects. But like um I'm hesitating to say too much here because I know in my mind that we're also going to be doing a sound design panel tomorrow, where this is also going to be relevant there, I imagine. Where it's like, everything in an audio drama, in an audio space, you're controlling for everything that's happening. So all of the sound that you hear, you've deliberately added. It's not like you're pointing a camera at a piece of the real world. It's more like you're building a set on a stage. So you're constructing all of it. And in different moments, for me, the sound design will take precedent over the music. And in other moments, I really want the music to shine. And yeah, I think that point about it can become exhausting if the music is just like if it's constant and overwhelming and poorly mixed. I think for me, the majority of the time, I almost want you to not, in Remnants anyway, most of the time, I almost want you to not notice that the music is there. And when I listen back to an episode of Remnants and I barely hear the music and I just kind of feel the sense of it, not that it's not audible, but that it kind of melts into everything that I'm doing in those moments where there's music going on, that's when I'm like, yeah, no, I'm satisfied with that. And yeah, so it's all about like it really varies from project to project and even scene to scene, how you feel all of those things out. And it is just a case of coming back and listening to something and picking at it and moving things around.
I feel like I'm gonna be the contentious one. And I'm like defending my baby, but I'm really big on um I think that you can translate again, and the overarching rule for this I think is the thing we've all been saying is it depends on the project, it depends on the show, it depends on what you're doing. Obviously I'm speaking for my show, which is more of a musical, and so I've got music pretty much constantly because it is a character and it's carrying story beats and recalling and bringing us back and forth. um I think that I hardly, I rarely do sound effects unless it's required to pull it in, and then I use the music to kind of like describe the scene in its own way. It's and so instead of okay, like let's say I was having like a car crash scene, it's like okay, instead of having like crashing sounds and trying to figure out how to soundscape the scene, how would I translate this where the listener is able to interpret what's happening through music, which I think is a different way to do that. The point being, it will change project to project, show to show, person to person you talk to. For anybody that's like trying to get into this, is it really depends on. I think the most important thing is figuring out what your fingerprints are and what you want them to be on the project you're working on, and then just trust yourself and stamp. And sometimes you just have to commit to an idea and go, because that's the best way to do it.
G, do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. I don't have as much experience with using music and sound effects in an audio drama setting. Um, in a more musical setting, using sound effects, I um in a more like technical way. Uh, it's just yeah. I mean, mixing and mastering. Um, but I think everyone else has said um, good stuff.
I think the biggest
How do you
overarching thing there was sorry, I'm so sorry. Mix and master is like I think the
Hmm.
biggest thing.
so how do you use music as a component to build character and narrative? Athan, do you want to start?
I always again I think it depends on the project. Um it really depends on what you're doing. I think I feel like I keep saying that on every question, but I think the biggest tell is I think everybody here has a different approach to how they're doing that, right? And that's good. That's a good thing. That's what you want. I would say rather than trying to build a character with music, I think it's good to, if you're, regardless of how you're building a project, being able to define motivations or background to the character with music. It does give you the ability to recall things later and be able to kind of build personality around a character, even in a subtle way, even if it's just like an operatic, like a motif playthrough or like a single couple notes. Um, would be my biggest thing for building a character with music. It's just like really just define their personality.
I tend to use like a lot of motifs in my musical writing. So I I will use a specific like musical phrase or collection of phrases to um, imply a character's involvement in this in something that where they're not physically present. So you can in Spiritbox Radio, I did a lot of that with foreshadowing and the implication of connections between different characters. I would use specific pieces of music to imply the presence or involvement in a character in specific scenes. And it was great to see the audience picking up on that as well. I could see people yelling and on Tumblr about like, "Oh my God, that was the theme for the man in the flat cap that was playing there," which felt strange because he's not there. And so I do stuff like that quite a lot. And in Remnants, I use the music to kind of move us through the emotional space that the apprentice is going through at the time. So whilst he's reading the remnants, we don't get any of his point of view. We get no commentary from him, no response from him. He's just reading the story and experiencing it as though he is experiencing what is being written, what has been written. So we don't really have an emotional journey moving through it, and so he's quite disconnected from a lot of the things you'd expect a protagonist to be able to have, especially when they're speaking that much. And I use the music to imply those things, and it's almost like this part of him is shining through and happening here. And you watch watch with your ears. There's a word for that. If you listen, you'll be able to hear deteriorations in particular melodies. And like this isn't something that I would necessarily expect listeners to immediately pick up on, but that disintegration of how the music works um, in various episodes and throughout various remnants, and as the show goes on, and those changes in how the music is sounding and being mastered and how it's coming in different scenes is all kind of reflective of and implying an emotional state that is otherwise absent. It can't have a presence elsewhere in this in the scene because the apprentice's responses are all abstracted.
Can I nerd out for 3 seconds about that?
Yes.
Something you said. I'm
Hell
sorry.
yeah.
I feel someone tell me to shut up if I'm being too much, but like not pulling from an audio drama. Um, if anybody's seen Into the Spider-Verse, they do
Mm.
this really
Hmm.
cool thing with the soundtrack where to build a character to find confidence in Miles. Spoilers for Spider-Verse. If anybody here hasn't seen it, it's old. Sorry, but they do this thing where they have the Prowler's theme has that like that synth stab
Yes.
bass sound to define the Prowler, and they use that whenever he's coming on scene, which is a leitmotif kind of pulling it throughout the whole show. But they do at the end when Miles finally accepts being Spider-Man and jumps off. They use that sound to kind of emphasize that's the backing backing synth in What Up Danger when he's jumping off the building, and they use that to show that he's gained confidence, and that is the answer to that question for me, is the way they use sound in that movie to kind of define character motivation and really show growth by pulling different instruments together. I think is huge.
Yeah. I also want to echo chat. We love a leitmotif. Um, and and yeah, and I think it also circles back to what you guys were saying before about setting up your rules and then finding ways to break them. Because you can, assign like motifs and stuff to characters. You can also assign instruments or tones or specific melodies to characters' movements or themes, and then have those specific components change as the story changes, uh, to really either hint at those changes or uh, foreshadow or just kind of like really make it that much more impactful, um, by breaking those rules you set up.
So kind of a similar question, but I know one of you brought it up in our chat. Do you use music as a motif to define and recall emotional beats? If so, why do you think it works so well?
I'm the one that mentioned that, and I've already answered this
Yeah,
question. So
yeah. Well, why do you think it works so well? I know, especially for your show, it gets used a lot.
yeah, I think it's because you again with audio dramas, it's interesting in that the media's not really super well. I don't want to say well defined, but it's not well, like the guidelines aren't super well defined, right? So if you think about like growing up as kids and as you get older, you almost just instinctively know how a movie or film should be structured, just because it's so ingrained in everyday life at this point, to where you're constantly seeing video and you're seeing movies and you're seeing television. For audio dramas, the listener is not, inherently trained on how to listen to a show, right? And so some shows will sound completely different and be structured completely different, and you kind of have to hand them the map of how to enjoy what you're listening to. And I think that if you use leitmotifs and callbacks to define, like we've been talking about a lot here, I think it works really well because you are almost getting a somewhat blank slate in a listener, to where you can say, hey, this is my show, it's different than anything else you're going to hear, here's how I'm presenting it to you, and you can kind of show them how those rules work, as opposed to them saying, well, this movie's bad. It's nothing like these other 1,000 movies I've seen. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I believe Marissa asked this one, just so we can define it for the group. What is diegetic music, and do you prefer to use diegetic music or non-diegetic music?
Oh yeah, that one. So diegetic music is music that characters are hearing in a scene. So that's like if a character puts on a record or they're listening to the radio in their car or something like that. And the non-diegetic music is that, usually like your leitmotifs, things like that, that you hear as an audience member, but the character doesn't hear. And I think something that I've really enjoyed recently has been playing with using diegetic music in my shows. So, for example, I'm trying to think of how to describe it without spoiling the show. But in Liars and Leeches, there's a scene where a character has a panic attack in a grocery store, and we had this like really cheery kind of like elevator-esque music playing in the store from the beginning. Um, that the listener doesn't know this going in, but it really contrasts what is happening with this character in the store. And I think that there's just so much fun to play with when it comes to diegetic music, and not only why characters are listening to music, but how they're perceiving it. So in that scene, for example, as the character starts to freak out more and more, the music starts to distort a little bit, it gets a little bit quieter, it gets a little bit darker. So I think just getting to mess around with music in a different way versus like your leitmotifs and music that's just for the audience is kind of one of my favorite things to mess with.
I love not telling the audience if it's diegetic or not and having it kind of flip between depending on what you're doing.
Gotta make them guess.
Yeah, I want everyone to be confused when you're done. I want you to just not know what happened.
I also really like playing with diegesis and moving from one to another, implying that something is non-diegetic, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, did they hear this? That's something that's really fun that I haven't had a lot of opportunity to play with yet, but watch that space because it's something I really love in other people's work. And yeah, I think it can be, you can use diegetic music in really powerful ways like that scene that Marissa was describing before, where it's serving almost a completely different purpose to when you're scoring something. It's a totally different use of what you're doing with the music. The only music that you ever hear in Not Quite Dead, within the show, apart from the intro and outro, is diegetic music, and you only hear it really, really briefly in the background of a scene in God, what season? How many seasons of my show is there? Um, in season 2, and it's like a really horrible, really emotionally fraught scene, and the music that's like playing in the background is this like pulsing club music, just like distantly in the background, underscoring this like really horrible moment of really intense panic again. And yeah, that was really interesting to sound design that, like to use music almost as a sound effect in that kind of way.
And then we have a couple of questions from the chat. I know we have one. What do you wish writers knew or did differently when writing their shows that would make it easier for the sound editing?
Oh man, how much time do you have?
Yeah. I'm gonna just give one very specific example. Derek is the co-writer for me on Grotto, and he'll sometimes write scenes, and he'll put like these like notes and things in the episode that are like struggles to stand, sound effect for, and then he'll put like just ridiculous stuff like, oh, sound of him becoming sad. What? What does that mean? Learning how to use. I wish in Derek's case, I wish he could like pretend he could hear and then write as if he could. He can, but he just writes like he can't, and then he just gives me directions that make no sense. So like, think about what you're writing. Is
A
my advice.
friend of mine sent me some scripts to read through, and they had written he cries on his Persian rug. And my feedback on the scene was the Persian rug is beautiful but silent in the scene.
Yeah.
Unless he says I am weeping on my Persian rug. Unfortunately, we will never know about the rug. I'm so sorry. But I'm quite, I mean, lucky feels like somewhat like an overstatement, because it's a real mixed blessing that this is the case. But I only sound design and score my own shows, which I also write. So if I'm only ever mad at myself, and if anything, I think I'm too descriptive with the sound design. Um, like versus like if I was writing for someone else to sound design my show, I think I'd probably want to give them more freedom than I give myself, but because it's all me, it's less of a problem.
Yeah, I don't do any production or work for, like, again, he writes, but it's our show, and then everything else is stuff I'm working on. I remembered, by the way, it was the whole scene took place in a library, but they never once said in the scene that it was a library or mentioned a library at all. And it was just like sounds like library. It's like the whole point is that they don't generally have sound. So that was
Yeah.
we were also launching that was so like 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, I was like, "Hey, do they ever mention we're in a library in this part?" And it was a whole thing. That was early days. Sorry.
I think for me, my biggest pet peeve with this question is just I feel like a lot of people write as if they're writing a movie and not an audio drama. And then it gets passed off to the sound designers, usually without sound designer, like sound designers aren't usually given the opportunity to input their thoughts onto a script. I think that's changing a little bit, but there are just so many little things to consider about your characters, specifically for audio drama. You know, things like what shoes do they wear? Do they wear certain clothes? Do they wear jewelry? How do they move? Do they have bad knees? Do they make noises when they stand up? Things like that, that I think a lot of people don't consider. And if that's not your wheelhouse, that's totally fine. But I think that asking sound designers to help you with the script is such a massive benefit in audio drama, because we are so clued into kind of everyday sounds that I think we have the ability to help you with conveying how your characters look or express themselves through sound only. And I think that, kind of having this back and forth of what your characters sound like versus just how they look is such a huge help for the sound designers.
I will say though, sometimes though, some of the coolest scenes are the ones that you just get and it's just only a visual description. You're like, how do you even do this in audio? And you just tackle it in a way, and then the whole scene just somehow comes together, and it just is so unique. I can't think of one on the top of my head, but I've heard plenty of shows where the editing is just like, you're like, how did they even get here? And it just stands out so much. I think that I agree with you, but I think that very rarely there's a creative element that can play in that's really cool if you break that rule sometimes.
That's fair.
Eira, did you want to add anything?
I don't have as much experience with sound design. Um, I think that's a really good point about sound designers having some input in the script, or at least like taking into account all the little everyday sounds. Um, yeah.
Okay. We have a question from Dr. Luke. Does anyone, when you're writing episodes, actually put musical cues in?
I did when I was writing Spirit Box Radio, because of how the music works in that show. So I would, if you go through like, oh, the Man in the Flag Caps theme will start here, and yeah, so here we'd have like the Sam and Oliver theme for that season, will come in at this moment, um, and like that was interesting, and quite often that would then prompt me to go and like write that piece of music, because I was like, I need to know how this is going to sound so I can shape the way that I'm moving through this, because the music in Spirit Box Radio recurs. Um, I do it less so in other stuff, where the way that the rules I have for the music in Remnants are just so different. It's like I don't need to write the cue that the music's going to be there, because I know that there will be music when we're reading the Remnant. But in Spirit Box Radio, I absolutely did.
Yeah, for the Icarus Rot, Sam Fallout Coys writes the scripts. And sometimes he'll write in notes about like there was this one scene where we have a sort of key change in the middle of a conversation, like um right as one character says this one phrase that's like seems normal. Well, actually it wasn't very normal at all. But but there was a note of like, key changes here, or um little notes of like uh quote unquote morning music, um and stuff like that. And that can be really helpful. But it's also a point of sometimes I talk about it with him and figure out like what it is uh he's looking for, and um what will sound good there, and figuring that out together.
Yeah, I think for me, I have always put cues into my scripts, but I've done it specifically working with the composer, like we've had a meeting where we sit down, we like go through the script, and it's like, okay, here are like the 3 or 4 spots that I was thinking of putting music in the script. Like, let's talk this through. And I feel like there have definitely been some times where through those conversations we've either added or taken away cues. But I think it's helpful to the composer to know where they're writing music for. So I think it's always a good idea to put them in.
Athan, I think you're making our chat thirsty for alcohol.
Sorry, I'm kidding. Don't do drugs. Don't drink, kids. This was a Dr. Pepper with lime in it. I'm kidding. Stay in school. Be cool. That's my official response.
Pretty cool.
Sponsored by Pepsi. No, I'm kidding. We're no sponsor. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Someone else.
Okay, and I know, will I go over our last question? If the chat has any more questions, we're more than happy to hear them. I believe the last question is, what is your favorite program to use, or programs? Eira, do you want to go?
I mean, I feel like I'm about to get like absolutely trashed because I have created every single audio drama I have ever made entirely in GarageBand.
Nothing wrong with
So
that.
yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. It's better than Audacity.
Yeah.
That's true. I'm a Pro Tools person, but have been slowly starting to shift into Reaper. I think if I only made my own shows, I'd probably shift into Reaper, but unfortunately, industry standard is still Pro Tools, so I'm stuck.
I'm fully in FL Studio because my background's music production, and so my workflow makes no sense. I'm so sorry, y'all.
I mean,
again, I
mine
know where the
makes no
buttons are.
sense either. I have an interest in Reaper. I've looked at Reaper, but the amount of time it would take for me to learn a new audio, I don't have time. I release an episode a week. I do not have time.
I got spoiled because Reaper lets you make themes, so I use a Pro Tools theme for Reaper, so it looks like Pro Tools. But
that's so good though.
Because I was like, I'm too lazy to learn a new DAW. I'm just gonna put a theme on here and pretend this is
I
Pro Tools.
completely feel you. I didn't know it did that. That changes the game.
Yeah, I think Pro Tools is cool, but yeah, Reaper's all right. I just know I hate Audacity. Sorry, sorry, Loop and Jim. Sorry, y'all. I hate Audacity, and yeah, FL Studio. That's what I use. I don't know. I want to clarify for Jem because I know Jem's here. I hate Audacity. Reply.
For me, it depends on what I'm looking to do. I like using Logic Pro, especially for the samples, instruments, and like the way it's organized. It's very simple, easy to use, especially for like sketching things out. But I also like using Ableton, specifically for how like nitpicky you can get with things you can modulate and change. Like I really like using the LFOs in that one, and I like that also in traction waveform. That's also a really good one. And I'm starting to learn Reaper right now. Um,
I mean, I think if you're using Ableton or FL Studio, or if you're using a DAW, like a professional DAW, I think it just starts to break down to preference, right? Because I mean, I don't know about
mhm,
y'all, but I'd say 90% of the things I'm doing in FL Studio are they're third-party plugins. Like I have like, Serum and Contact and all these other weird like VSTs that I've gathered over the last 12 years, and I'm using that would work in any DAW. At some point, it just becomes preference of where the buttons are.
mhm.
I am just nodding because I have no idea what any of those are. Okay. Any more questions from the chat?
That's
That's such a
basically what
good
a
way.
bus is.
That's such a good way to describe a bus.
It helped. As soon as they said that, I was like, yeah.
Actually, yeah, that's the next question from chat. What is a bus? No, I'm kidding. This is masterclass now.
Okay, I do have one more. This was a question that was asked by the person who helped me formulate the question, so they sounded better than what was my head. And they just wanted to know, when you're aligning a new bit of music with the dialogue for the first time, do you have the music playing in one ear? Or sorry, do you have the dialogue playing in one ear while you compose? Is the dialogue looping and looping while you're playing like endless samples of music? Are you trying to match the swell of the music to the moment? How do you go about that?
I'm gonna be honest. At some point, some episodes, I've got the music. I'll make the music and I'll have the dialogue all lined up, and I'll be like, "This is the song that goes there," and then I just kind of put it in, and then you just listen to it. I don't think splitting it in earbuds and headphones, I think, is complicated for me at least. If somebody knows how to do that very easily, very cool. I couldn't figure it out, so I just sit there and just brain rot over and over, listen to everything all at once, and just drag it around.
I usually like getting a draft version and then listening to it. Like I'll write the music first, listen to it with the audio, and then if I need to like extend it or shift its positioning, I'll do that. But I think trying to compose with the dialogue playing would just be like too much noise at once.
Yeah, my music making is quite separate from making the dialogue. I think in pretty much every instance where I've made music, it's about connecting things up afterwards rather than like composing onto a scene, if that makes sense. So because I have all of these, I have like a set amount of pieces that come in and change and evolve rather than writing for a specific scene. It's a slightly different kind of thing. They're just like really separate for me.
I think it also depends on the project too. I think that's been the overarching answer here. But like similarly, I'm always working a separate project, but then sometimes you want a scene where like if you're doing more diegetic stuff, you need to be able to hear like what's happening in the scene to get it up. I don't know. It really depends.
Looks like we have a question from Dr. Loop. They say they're interested in the panel's opinion on optimal length for a theme tune.
Depends on the tune.
10 minutes.
Depends on
Make them wait.
how.
Half the episode. No.
I think it should be like a minute is pushing it. I would
Yeah.
say.
I'd say 15 seconds. 15.
Yeah,
20.
yeah. You want it. It should be brief. But yeah, especially as like a lot of audio drama, the episodes are very very short. But yeah, I'd say like a minute, and you're pushing it a bit. Um,
And then Cherry Mecca asks if you have any favorite time signatures or any weird little plug-in noises to use in music creation.
Cherry's asking that to make fun of me because I'll stream when I'm working on music for the show sometimes, and a lot of it I just scream and then pitch correct and chop and use that what might me just going like, and that's the sound in the show, and they're making fun of me. They're making fun of me making my yells. That's my
Honestly,
favorite though.
I think my favorite, it's kind of a boring answer because it doesn't actually make noise, but the Ulean loudness plugin that tells you how loud your audio is and if it's peaking or not, absolute game changer. I feel like that's such a boring answer because it's not like a synth or anything, but like if you make audio, get a loudness meter, and that one's
Preach.
free.
You're right. Ulean specifically. You're right. That's the best. Yeah, that's the best plugin.
We love a free
Right.
loudness meter that's good.
Yeah.
So it looks like we're out of questions. Does anyone want to go over anything? No? Want to talk about your shows for a brief period? Promote them?
I will not go first. I've gone first every time, and I feel like I'm talking too much, and so I'm gonna sit and listen for a minute.
G, do you want to go first?
Sure. Listen to the Icarus Rot. We've got a couple episodes out now. And we're working on more. And yeah, and I've got a couple albums out. If you want to check them out. And I've got more on the way. Um, yeah. Hell yeah.
Very nice. I'm currently releasing Remnants at the moment, which is a dark fantasy thriller show. Which is I'm doing some fun things with music in that. I think it's fun, and I'm really pleased with it as an overall piece. It's kind of insidiously spooky, and it's full of like big feelings. The joke tagline that the little fan group has come up with was too weepy for work, uh, which I now tag all of the episodes. So that's Remnants. It's a good time. The finale of season 1 will be happening on the 24th of February. And Not Quite Dead season 4 is about to come back. I'll be crowdfunding for that in March. And Not Quite Dead is a gory horror romance show about vampires. And yeah, that one doesn't have very much music in it at all. But it's still a good time. And yeah, I'll be crowdfunding for season 4 of Not Quite Dead throughout March. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And there's like just over 40 episodes of vampires for you to sink your teeth into. I've only been talking about it for like a minute, and I still managed to get that pun in. I'm quite proud of myself for that. But yeah, so those are my shows that I'm releasing. I also have Spirit Box Radio, which is complete at 93 episodes, and Clockwork Bird, which is lovely, janky, darling first show that I ever made, which is 30 episodes long.
Nice.
I would say my main show that I'd want to promote would be Liars and Leeches. That one's a horror audio drama that I wrote. It's all about, well, I guess it's supernatural horror, but it's about like grief, anxiety, and overcoming loss. That one I created, and then I also did the dialogue editing, mixing, and mastering, as well as directing. And then I would say, in terms of music, probably the best one to check out would be Dark Dice. I wasn't the composer, that was Brandon Boone, but I did the mixing and mastering on a lot of their episodes. So if you kind of want to see a good example of like how to mix and master when like the sound effects are at 100% and the music's at 100%, that's probably the best example I have.
I'm a curveball. I'm not promoting Grotto. If I was going to ask people to check out one thing, here at the end of the year, but here very soon we'll have more info. We're launching a show called Redacted, the horror comedy following Jamie playing Jacob, who steals his dead twin's identity and solves paranormal cases, which I'm very excited for. And there's nowhere to find anything for that, so I'm just promoting words, and you'll just go look and there's nothing there. But
Okay, so a couple of things to go over. Again, don't forget about our giveaway. Also, I believe our panels are recorded and uploaded. I know we have the VOD on Twitch, and we also have an artist alley on our Discord for the podcast book club. Make sure you check it out. We have some lovely artists there. And also, after this panel is done, you can hop in the voice chat on PBC Discord to talk to other congoers. That is all we have today. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you guys for doing the panel. You guys were lovely.
Thanks for having me. It's been nice.
Yeah.
Thanks
this is
for
great.
hosting us.
yeah, super fun.